Welcome back to Culturwe. We are continuing our conversation from last week on feminism in the 21st century. Hope you enjoy.
One of the things that I find is a very big problem with Turkey is the violence against women, which is an actual very big problem in Turkey. And they call it like femicide. So it's like when men actually kill women, it's an act of violence. And it's a huge problem in Turkey. It's been for years. There are organizations fights for this particular issue for women, but it's very hard because the government is not really doing anything about it and pretty much ignoring a very big part of it. And one of the things that the government did wrong is the Istanbul Convention, which is the convention that fights against violence against women. So it protects them, it looks into policies.
The United Nations Conference?
Yeah, so it was in Istanbul, actually named ironically Istanbul Convention, which is horrible that afterwards, I think it was 2021, that Turkey withdrew themselves from the convention. And I've tried to look into reasons for why you would leave this convention. And one thing I found, which is like a sentence that was said by like the communication person, whatever, within the government in Turkey, is that it goes against the Turkish family values, because I think it mentions like homosexuality or something within it. And they say, well, it goes against the Turkish family values and traditions, so we can't like support this. So so that's the reason I found online of why they withdrew, or the reason they give for why they withdrew themselves from this convention, which is very important because it's a big problem in Turkey. And I think there's like statistics, but it's the same thing with like all statistics that like you don't really know the entire number, and it could be so much more, but I think usually it's like around 400 women a year that dies because of this. I think just in 2023, and I don't know to what month they're talking about, but it's been like 227 women that's died just this year, which is we're not even done with the year. So it's a very big problem. I've seen one art exhibition that I saw for this that was very touching. It's like shoes on a wall of a building. It's like a huge building, and it's like I think around 300 or 400 just like black high heels stuck on a wall, and it's like the numbers of women that's died that year. I think it was maybe 2020 something, that exhibit. I don't remember the exact year. It's a very big issue, but like I said, because there isn't really support from the government for this, there's a limit there on what you actually can do as well if the policies doesn't really support it. I mean, they say that we don't really need this, like this is what they said as well, that we don't really need the Istanbul Convention because we have our own policies that protect women. But I mean, they're still dying, so obviously something is wrong.
Not working. Not only grassroots, bottom-up approaches, but definiteness. Because we hear a lot on our conservative side of like, well, we don't need big government, we don't need policy. The policy guides society, and it makes sure that people are held accountable. And
Exactly.
it's that tone, just like, talking about Korea and being like, we're going to penalize you if you take your paternity leave, and that tells other men don't do it.
Exactly.
The same thing goes on the opposite end of, if we're going to hold you accountable, if this is illegal, you're going to be put in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 30, whatever it is, that holds you accountable and sets the standard for those coming after you. It's so necessary to sign those conventions.
Yeah, it was actually horrible that they withdrew, because it kind of also shows that, I mean, some small things is a bigger problem for them than actually women getting killed like left and right. And there is so many, and I think there is a gap in the statistic of that there are a lot of women that has died, but they don't actually know how or like the motive or whatever, and they're lost in like the numbers of that as well. So the statistics, actually the women they know have been killed for a reason by men, and usually it's because they actually found the man. So I think the numbers are a lot bigger than they're letting on. And Turkey
Always.
is kind of known for that as well. And I think a lot of countries as well is known for not really letting on.
Yeah, because
How big the
Korea
numbers are.
also has a huge problem with the same issues, with a lot of women going through, because we have a term called dating violence. So it's a separate issue from domestic violence, because it's not really considered to be the same kind of violence when you're not married. So it's an increasing number recently, because I don't think it was even a term or even a thing that we talked about a few years ago, but now it's always on the news, where it's always, oh, she broke up with this person and then she got attacked. This boyfriend, ex-boyfriend killed his ex-girlfriend and her family and all those things. It's very much a huge issue in Korea and, well, Turkey and any other places when it comes to women being victims. And like you said, it's just because there's not a statistic doesn't mean it just doesn't exist. It just means nobody's talking about it. And in Korea, when you're not talking about it, it doesn't exist. That's what we like to do. We like to say, oh, I don't see it, so it doesn't exist. Don't talk to me about it. I don't want to know. That's basically what privilege is, that you can say, oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's upsetting. I don't want to talk about it. I do it too. And it's good to talk about things. You have to realize, just because you're not comfortable, it's better to be uncomfortable than in future dying from it. So it's better to talk about it, and with children, obviously, letting them know. I mean, I saw this TikTok last week where it was like two families with children. And one family had a son, the other had a daughter, and they were both very young. I think the daughter, she had a bikini on. This boy is just like 5 or 6, very young. And the mother of that boy is like, go somewhere, there's like, my child is looking, and it's blah blah blah, and it's those, like, it's a very common video that we see where women are like, I don't want to see it, I don't want my son to see it because it's not good for education, blah blah blah. But then at the end of the video, she says, okay, it's fine, it's the beach, whatever, it's fine, I won't talk about it. And then she says, I'm not gonna care in the future when my son rapes your daughter. And I was shocked. How could anyone say that in any setting, or what kind of reason? Doesn't make any sense. It really
that's buying in, and I think it's the most upsetting and genius part of the patriarchy is that somehow women have been convinced to police other women. They've been pitted against other women in that way, that they are so indoctrinated with what they should be doing that they feel that they have to make other people do it. And it's really hard to step outside of that mindset. I think of it with cults, religions, anything that comes out. It's like you're so indoctrinated that if you're policing other people, something's going on. Like, it is. I mean,
also, as a woman, policing other women is just I don't get, because I'm like, if anyone is supposed to understand me, it's you.
Exactly. You should know what we're going.
It's the same thing with like the privilege thing you said, Sarah, of like, women don't really have the privilege to not see or not talk about it or not think about it, because it can happen to anyone. Like anyone knows someone that has gone through something horrible, or know someone that's gone through something horrible. And it's such a constant thing for us. Like, it's always there. So I think it's so easy for men to just like look away, and they actually having the privilege of not having to really think about it, because it doesn't really happen to them all the time. And I don't think they really even grasp how deep it actually goes for us. So I think it's definitely
it's an important education that we have to have in schools, in family, in any setting. You just have to talk about it a lot.
It's not like boys are born with those thoughts. Like in this case, like the example you talk about, that is actually the mother teaching the son.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is like, okay.
Sexualization of women. Like,
exactly.
The father. If the father's going to allow that to happen, that's the father too. Like, It's this weird, we have it all the time with little girls here of like, or just women in general. It's like, well, what were you wearing? Why were they
Yeah,
attacking you?
exactly. Oh my
Like I could
God.
be
I hate
wearing
that.
300 pounds of clothes and it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's that very early childhood education is so vastly important. And I always think of, did you ever get the like I would come home and or to the talk to the teacher and be like, that guy pulled my hair or he is being mean to me. And it's like, well, not
Ugh,
you know,
yeah.
such a toxic thing
Yeah.
that until it's pointed out of like, no, that normalizes abusive behavior in a relationship where it's like, well, if he must really love me if, he's being mean to me. Like, what? Like,
No.
absolutely not. Like,
Oh my
No.
God.
no, like, you don't see that it's such a weird double
Don't do
standard
that.
kind of thing. Like, you're getting different messages of like, oh, if he pulls your pigtail, he likes you. But then, like, in a fairy tale, you don't see Prince Charming slapping Cinderella. Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
No.
Like,
No.
like I'm getting a lot of mixed messages here. How am I supposed to be treated? And it's so upsetting because I think we see the effects of male anger, especially
Mm.
say in the United States with gun violence. One, the guns are an issue, but
Yeah.
also the society is an issue of being that angry and feeling you have the right to take it out on others. So it's just
Yeah.
such a systemic issue that is not just about domestic violence, but it's about violence in general.
Exactly. And it's
And
the
men
same
are
in
not born that
Turkey.
way. Men are born with
Yeah.
emotions and they can cry and do all these things. And like part of feminism is fighting for the right for everybody to have feelings, everyone to feel safe
Yeah.
and feel themselves. And I
Right.
think it's so sad that it's
Exactly.
tied
Yeah.
up in this weird patriarchal religious drama that somehow you're not Christian enough or Muslim enough or Jewish enough or whatever enough if you are not, standing
Doing
by
this.
the
Yeah.
anti-female standards.
Exactly. That's the thing of like the violence in Turkey that men think they're entitled to women and doing what they want with them. And it's the same thing of like them trying to divorce their abusive husband and then they getting killed. And like there's so many examples. And that's the thing of like, well, why didn't you just leave him? Or why did you say no? And like always throwing it to the woman. And I'm like, do you have any idea how many examples we have of a woman trying actually to do that and still not working?
Like,
So
yeah,
I
but
think,
why didn't he get told no?
yeah,
When was the last time he was told no? Like, and that something was wrong. It's always the woman. It's so fascinating.
Always.
it
Yeah.
really is. But I think it's also interesting this double standard of the term feminism, even of like calling oneself feminist. There is a specific stereotype
Oh yeah.
that you have to be when you say you're a feminist, or that they're like, oh, like, okay. And there's like this negative connotation to it. I mean, even here when I'm like with like relatives and stuff, they're like, yeah, like they know I'm like a feminist, and they're like, oh, like boobs out outside, and like stuff like the stereotype of like woman walking out without a shirt protesting or something.
Right? You're like, I'm
Like, first of
sorry.
all, if they want their boobs out, then let them
Go for it. I
doesn't mean
wish
I'm gonna do
That's
it, but
none of my
they could.
business. No.
This will slap
don't
me in
do
the face. Absolutely not. Like,
yeah.
like it's not going anywhere. But God, it's so silly.
Exactly. It's so silly. And then I started reading about like intersectional feminism and how like very amazing it was, because just saying feminism kind of loses some parts for other people and doesn't really fit for everyone. And this intersectional feminism of it actually being, like we talked about, how white women having more rights than women of color, for example, and that intersectional feminism means equality for all. So it can be like people with a disability, it can be everyone. So I think it's
Right.
and I mean, I've never been afraid to say that I am, because I'm like, yes, human rights, yes, I believe in that.
Yeah, no, it's such a weird thing. Like growing up, I think there was a very negative connotation coming from a very rural, conservative state, being
Yeah.
raised Catholic, of calling yourself a feminist. And I think from a very early age, I could consider myself that of like, like, I'm not going to listen to your crap. And like, I'm blessed that my father was very reciprocal of that. And as was my mother, like, and my dad taught us that, like, if you can't argue both sides, you're never going to win. So, he prepped us in that way to like, now if I'm challenged of that terminology of using that identifier, it's very easy to talk someone down from their crazy of
Yeah.
conservativeness and just go, hey, human rights. I think everyone should have them. And
Mm,
how do you argue with that? You don't,
you don't.
because you're going to look real stupid
Yeah.
if you do. It's like, yes, we want human
Always.
rights. That should be the idea,
Mm.
the end goal.
For me, I usually don't like go around and say, "Oh, I'm a feminist." I usually just talk about, "Oh, this is right, this is wrong," kind of thing, rather than, "Oh, I am a feminist." Because in Korea, when you say, "Oh, I'm a feminist," that's either you mean, "Oh, I hate men," or I want to get out of Korea. Because when we think of feminism, we think of Western mindset that it automatically, when you're so into these concepts that are coming from Western countries, that usually people think, oh, they're part of this westernization that's happening in Korea and we don't like it. Because it happened so fast that we're losing so many things that we had. Obviously, we lost good things, but also a lot of bad things we're losing at the moment. And it's a good thing. You just have to embrace it, but it's automatically, because Korea is so nationalistic, that it's automatically just like, oh, they hate Korea
I feel like
and they hate men.
like every time we bring up something, it's like, oh, you hate Korea.
If you don't agree with the traditional mindset in Korea, you hate Korea. They don't really go, oh, I'll accept this, I'll accept that. Learning about different things, it's very hard to talk to with Koreans who are very traditional. But it's same with feminism, where they still have this mindset, because Korean feminism was in the beginning was very radical feminism. So it's just barely starting to change and barely starting to have that awareness that there is not just radical feminism, there's different kinds, and it's all about gender equality, and it's a slow progress, but it's happening, but it's still very negative image they have. So usually I'm careful with that term, but yeah, that's, for me, that's what it is.
But that's the thing with the term, that like
Mm.
feminist movements, even if you don't call them, is nothing new. Like in Korea and
Right.
Turkey, there is in other
Mhm.
parts of the world, there's always been women fighting for their rights.
Mm.
And either you call it a feminist movement or you don't, but it's basically the same thing. And just having it a term can make it be easily defined in a way.
Yeah, we
And
love boxes. That's what humans love. We love terms.
exactly,
Mm.
like
Mm.
categorizing stuff. That's what I learned in archaeology. It's just categories. We love that.
Do you remember the first time that you maybe considered yourself a feminist, or you recognized the inequality of being female?
I'm part of the Turkish culture, so it was very easy. It's hilariously divided in our culture, at least in the Turkish culture that we have here in Sweden, within the Turkish diaspora. It can just be from big things to very tiny, small things. Guys, for example, travel to other countries. They're like, oh yeah, go learn. And when like girls do it, they're like, what are you gonna do in another country? Like what trip? Like it can be that, to like men being out partying and drinking and being with other women. But then when girls do it, they're like, oh my God, like she lost her mind. It can be like anything, like literally. But yeah, the restrictions for women in our culture is a lot. And it can be very tough, especially when you live within the Swedish culture as well, which is very different. So you kind of see how different it is, and you try to question stuff. So yeah, I've always questioned it, and I think that's why it's also so hard for women in our culture a bit more, I think, than the guys. I mean, obviously they also have a lot of pressure, of course, that comes with it, but when they get a bit older, it's a lot easier for them to break free from that in a way, but it's not as easy for us. So I've always discussed this and women's rights, and I always had issues with it, and I've always discussed it with people, and I've not really had to say that I'm a feminist with like relatives or family and stuff. Like they know, and I go off really easily when we discuss stuff like this. I'm just like ready. That's for me.
I think for me, in at least in my family, I'm privileged enough that my family is not really a traditional Korean household, that I've seen my parents being equal and my brother and I equal, and my brother's, I mean, in traditional Korean mindset, my brother is very not traditional, considering he's a very good, great cook and he cleans and all those things, and I'm just happy to be there usually. But I think I learned a lot when I was in US. That's when I really learned about what feminism even is. I think going to America really, I've learned a lot just by living there, because
Mm.
it's so vocal about these things that usually in other countries I just never really heard about.
Yeah.
But it might also have been the time that I went, where it was
Oh,
just
for sure.
really
Yeah.
amplified with everything, that I was just like, God, there's just so many things that I need to know, and it's important. And I started questioning, why haven't I really heard about this before? And it's there definitely in other countries. It's just America's more open about things when they're talking,
Yeah, we
discussing.
love to scream about things.
Mm.
In good,
Sometimes it's
bad, and ugly
scary,
ways.
but I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
good. I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's good.
yeah, I think mine,
Anyways.
I remember as a kid, and it's not like my parents were, but like both my parents worked. Like my
Mm.
mother was a very successful teacher, and my dad did a lot of, heavy lifting that a lot of dads didn't do because they were partners and they operated that way. But I remember at any like Thanksgiving or Christmas big family meal, all
Mm.
my uncles and boy cousins would go off into the living room and start watching football or some
Mm.
show, and here are
Mm.
all the women picking up the dishes, and I just remember being like a 6-year-old and being like, "The hell? Like,
Mm.
why is Ryan not here? What's going on? Where the hell's Brian? Like, where are my cousins that are not helping?
Right.
Like, why am
Yeah.
I over here schlepping away?" And I love to help now. Like, it's very much a part of my personality, but and it was just more the gender roles of like, well, that just is how it is. And it's like, it's how it is
Mm.
because grandma and grandpa are here. Like, that's why it's how it is. And I think also growing up in the Catholic Church, I started questioning rather early why women were not more prevalent. My sister was one of the first altar boys, I guess, in the church, and then I did it as well for a short time, but it it was so drastically different than what I was seeing at home, where it was much more equal and we were not being limited. Maybe it would have come out if I had brothers, but I doubt it. But yeah, it was just like these weird little gender things that would happen, and you're just like, why can't I do that? Why can't I sit like this? Why am I told,
Yeah.
to dress a certain way or whatnot by others? And then, coming into my own, I remember at the orphan train, realizing the positions and jobs that I was doing or that other women were doing were not as valued monetarily because there's an
Mhm.
assumption that you are married. And that's
Yeah.
not just where I was in the Midwest. It's very much a part of our society of like, well, we don't need to pay her as much. We don't need to give that position benefits. We don't need to do these things because her husband already has it. And that's a big assumption to make,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
especially in our world today. And I remember getting real fired up about that, thinking of soapboxes and being angry and feisty about it and just being like,
Mm.
well, why does that make sense? Like I have,
Mhm.
XYZ education or they have XYZ education. Why is there this assumption that they are not as valued? Even though I can see the value, we can all see the value in these positions and these women.
Mhm.
Why are we not being treated justly?
Yeah.
And
I love that wherever part of the world you are, the gender norms are so similar.
yeah,
Like women being in the
So
kitchen,
similar.
yeah,
Yeah.
like talking, and the guys and men sitting in the living room,
yep.
usually talking about politics, which I hate anyways.
See, I was the opposite. I was like, let me at him.
Oh.
Let me go
No,
watch the
it's because
football
it
game
was just
or
in circles. Everyone thought something else, and it just like started screaming. And I was just like, I'd rather just sit in the kitchen with the girls, anyways. Like, I'm fine.
You do have a
Yeah,
big family. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
I
me,
do.
it's a small
And
exactly.
family, so it's
that's the
very
thing.
different. Yeah.
It's very big. And so, yeah, I was rather in the kitchen. But yeah, when you're younger,
Oh
obviously,
yeah.
you're like, okay, why is my cousin sitting there and just chilling? And we're just like
Hmm.
in the kitchen. But yeah, definitely.
It's one of those things that it
Definitely.
starts at
Yeah.
home, it starts in school, it starts
Hmm.
grassroots to
Mm,
to
Yeah.
change things, but it also is
Hmm.
very influenced by policy.
Yeah. I
yeah,
think
I
I
think what
was
it's when you,
very
sorry.
privileged. For me is that obviously I have a very small family. So we only, even during like holidays, we only hang out like my cousin and
Mm.
my grandparents. That's it. So it's
Right.
usually around eight, not even
Oh my
eight
God.
people in total, but that's
Oh
it.
my God.
And usually I'm obviously, my cousins are like, they're a baby compared to like us. And it's what's great for me was that my parents always taught both my brother and I the same way. So whatever we had to do in kitchen, my brother's always with me. So we were
Yeah.
like twins for everything that for me I didn't really realize until I had to experience it in other places, that I was like, oh, my brother is different. And my dad's different. My family is different. And that's how it kind of clicked later. Because obviously, like you talked about, Shaylee, like coming from religious background, you kind of feel, oh, why am I restricted in some things? That just but
Yeah.
I'm still a Christian, then I just automatically I'm saying, but it's church. It's how it should be, how it's supposed to be, that I just don't question. But it's
Mhm.
like it's things
But
like
maybe you'll
what you
start
have
questioning
to,
more.
but it's like what you have to wear and stuff. Obviously, I think now that I'm older, usually my parents don't say anything about what I do in church and stuff. But when I was younger, because we went to the same church with my grandparents, and obviously they're more religious than me, that I had to have certain clothes. I still do, just by habit, that I always wear more dressed up when I'm going to church. But when I was younger, even during hot Korean summer, I couldn't wear shorts. But my brother could, because usually men's shorts are longer. So
Yeah.
what I could do was that I could just wear what he's wearing, so it's like up to like knee length. So
Yeah.
if my shorts are up to knee length, I'm allowed to. It's fine. My grandma's not gonna say anything.
The men's is the standard.
Mm,
Women's has to be compared to it.
right. Yeah.
So ridiculous.
Mm,
But
Yeah.
it's it's what it is. It's like, well, if we consider we as in men, or like
mm,
the males of the that are writing the law in that church, consider this as our dress, then we need to make sure our women are dressed in a similar fashion or covered up in a similar fashion. And it's that comparison, unfortunately.
mhm.
Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Culture Week. Join us every Thursday on any podcast listening app and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Culture Week.